Welcome to Pioneers in Payments, where payments experts share their insights. Now, here's our host, Donna Blum.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Pioneers in Payments. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Alex Johnson from Fintech Takes. Welcome, Alex. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, I'm so glad that you can join us. Actually, we were talking a little bit before we started the recording, and you are a pro at these kinds of podcasts. I'm sort of a beginner, but I'm really looking forward to our conversation here today. To get us started, Alex, though, would you mind sharing a little bit with our audience about who you are, your background in the payments industry, and the work that you do at Fintech Takes?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've worked in fintech and financial services for 15 plus years. It goes all the way back to well before fintech was a term, but working in and around really the credit card industry in particular. And so my entry into payments was working with very large credit card issuers around sort of their credit decisioning, credit issuing, origination, all of those sort of upfront processes in order to get credit cards into people's hands. I then spent a couple of years leading research for the credit card group at Mercator Advisory Group, which is a payments consulting firm. That was right around the time that EMV chip cards were rolling out in the US, and lots of exciting stuff was happening within the payment space. So spent some time doing lots of research and consulting work there. And then since then have bounced around a couple of different roles within the industry, sort of a combination of corporate strategy at some large fintech and technology companies, as well as more time spent doing market research specifically focused on fintech. And that's what led me to create Fintech Takes, which is a newsletter focused on sort of analyzing the collision of banking and payments with technology and all of the sort of implications that come out of that.
Great. Well, that's exactly the space that we're in as well, having conversation about the payments industry and definitely the intersection of payments with technology. So, my first question for you is to kind of help summarize what's happening in the payments industry today. What would you say is the most notable trend?
Yeah, I mean, I think the trend of embedded payments is not new, obviously, right? We've been embedding payments in all kinds of places for a really long time, but I do think we have hit kind of a critical acceleration point around embedded payments, and that's really just a function of the fact that everything else that's not payments is now run with software, right? And so because everything is based on software, whether that's your local gym that you go to that now manages all of your sort of subscriptions and memberships via whatever sort of verticalized software they're using, or it could be connected cars now that have sort of software sitting at the middle of the sort of driving experience for consumers. There are just so many more places where software is now sort of dictating the experiences that consumers and businesses have. And where there's software, there's an API, and where there's an API, there's a place to plug in payments. And I find that of all of the areas of embedded finance, which is a large trend and something that obviously I've been paying a lot of attention to through the newsletter, payments is just the most sort of obvious and easily sort of value added service from a financial services perspective that you can add in, right? It greases the wheels of transactions, it generates revenue, it speeds up the experience for consumers or for businesses. And so payments just makes all the sense in the world. And I think while we've spent decades trying to sort of embed payments in all the places that they need to be, I think we still have a long way to go. And that's kind of the trend that I'm paying the most attention to.
Very good. Yes, we're kind of seeing things just becoming more streamlined. There's certainly a whole lot more options out there today than there used to be. So interesting times in the industry. So a lot of the people watching our podcast are payments professionals. They work for financial institutions or processors or networks. And so wanted to just kind of boil down your knowledge and experience in the industry and provide them with some guideposts. So what would you say is the top opportunity for these payments professionals today?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably the top opportunity, and it's one that is sort of eternal, but it kind of changes shape, or the opportunity sort of looks a little different every couple of years, is just trying to keep pace with the way that customers want to pay and want to transact, right? And it's interesting. I see a lot of innovations coming out of fintech focused on payments, where the motivations for this new innovation or this new product that people are pushing, it has something to do other than with customers, right? So like a common one we see in payments a lot is, well, you should use this alternative payment solution that we're rolling out because it's going to lower your costs, right? So if you're pitching to merchants, it's like, hey, lower your costs to accept payments. This is going to be great. And what I find, and this is even true with like rewards, right? Sometimes there'll be a new payment mechanism that rolls out for consumers, and they go, oh, you're going to love this because it has all these great rewards attached to it. And I think the reality that we kind of constantly forget is that businesses and consumers, despite them always having these new payment options available to them and always having these new technologies and new ways of accessing payments, they're pretty simple in what they want, right? And what they want doesn't really change that much. Again, it looks different year over year, but the fundamentals don't really change. Consumers want convenience for being able to transact in whatever sort of method they're trying to do that in. And businesses want to sell more, right? And generally speaking, what I find is that the most successful sort of payment innovations or payment solutions are the ones that harness whatever the new technology is, or the new channel, or the new way that consumers or businesses are interacting with each other. And that stuff does change all the time, right? With the sort of eternal interest that consumers have in convenient, seamless transactions, whatever is easiest. And on the other hand, from a business perspective, what's going to help merchants sell more, right? And I mean, just to pick on one example that I spent a lot of time thinking about, buy now, pay later is really interesting to me because ultimately, buy now, pay later is more expensive to merchants as a payment method than credit cards, certainly than debit cards or ACH, account to account payments. So why would merchants prioritize it? Why are they pushing that? I thought merchants wanted to cut their payment acceptance costs. They do, and the largest ones like Walmart and Amazon really care about that. But the vast majority of merchants, their number one goal, which makes sense, is they want to sell more. And buy now, pay later, despite its many faults or sort of many challenges, it's demonstrated to drive incremental sales for merchants. And that's ultimately what's most important to them. And so I think trying to anchor yourself on what are these sort of unchanging value propositions that everyone always cares about, then sort of figuring out what that looks like in combination with whatever the new technology is or new regulatory framework, or the things that do change all the time, and not getting so sort of overly clever. I think a lot of times we sort of play three-dimensional chess with payments. We're like, we're going to do this, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do this, and all these things are going to come together, and we'll have this perfect strategy. And it's sort of like what a McKinsey consultant would draw on a whiteboard, and it looks really good, but it doesn't work in practice. And I think in practice, keeping things simple and keeping things anchored on what the customer always wants is really important.
Excellent advice. Keep things simple and customer centric. I love it. Okay, so we talked about the top opportunity. What would you say is the biggest challenge for these organizations that process payments?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest challenge is just, as you were saying before, there's so much competition right now, right? I mean, I think that one thing that is a really bad idea if you're in payments is to assume that whatever position you have in the market is going to be sustainable just because you have it, right? And that, to be fair to people, used to be a really valid assumption, right? I mean, like, it took a lot of work to get some position in the market or to get some market share. But once you had it, there was just an inertia around payments that was really hard to displace. And part of it was consumers didn't really like to change. They were just sort of used to doing what they were doing. Part of it was that if you were selling in a B2B context, a A lot of that was like relationship-based selling. You take your friend out for dinner or to go golfing or whatever. But there just wasn't like a lot of change. That I think has shifted, and I think it's due to fintech and due to technology, right? I mean, we have now trained whole generations of consumers, business executives to think that, there's always going to be some other good solution out there next, right? Like we're all in our personal lives kind of beta testers constantly of what's new, right? I mean, I've been playing around lately with large language models and machine learning, right? Because there's all these new applications coming out, and it sort of struck me when that was happening that these products are not really ready for prime time. They make a lot of mistakes, but like many people, are rushing to embrace the future, right? I mean, like we have trained ourselves with technology to always expect there to be something new and to be very open about trying it. And I think that mentality has seeped into payments and means that there's always some new product. There's always some new competitor that's trying to sort of take market share away from you or is pitching a different version of the future. And your customers, whether you like it or not, are going to be much more open-minded to that than they used to be. And a lot of the barriers and the switching costs that used to exist, again, going back to software, a lot of these things used to be, hard-coded into COBOL systems that were really hard to change. And so again, there was this sort of built-in fragility and inertia to the systems that existed. And so changing them was so hard, and there was such a barrier to swapping things out. That barrier doesn't exist, right? I mean, again, to pick on checkout pages and buy now, pay later and e-commerce, all of these checkout pages just have plugins, right? Like if you're a merchant and you're setting up payments for Shopify, you can literally just swap in and out different payments, and you can test which ones work better, and you can just sort of constantly be running experiments. And that's the way the world is going. And so I think the biggest challenge is just trying to maintain and grow your position in the market when there's just this constant churn underneath you of people who are trying to displace you.
Right. And we've certainly seen a lot of displacement or disruption from the fintech space, doing things perhaps faster, better, in maybe a more kind of a cool way than the traditional banks do. And so, we've seen obviously some market share shift from traditional banks to fintechs recently, and fintechs who are morphing to offer more traditional banking type services. So yeah, lots of change in the industry today. Whereas, as you mentioned, for decades it was pretty status quo.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's exciting. It's an exciting time to be a part of the industry, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
So we talked about the top opportunity and the biggest challenge. This is probably the most difficult question to answer because I'm asking you to kind of take your sum total of knowledge and experience in the industry and provide our audience with one silver bullet piece of advice. What would that be?
So my piece of advice is rooted in my experience, which is learning how little I actually know about how all this stuff works, right? I mean, I think that a thing that I get writing the newsletter is this constant dose of humility where it's just like, oh my God, I didn't realize that all of these other things are out there. This is its own whole world. I could spend the next 50 years trying to learn everything there is to know about this and still not learn it all. And so I come to this question with like very much of a sort of constantly being humbled by how little I know. And I think that's, I guess, the piece of advice I would give. And the silver bullet is stay as curious as possible about stuff. I mean, I think that it's really tempting, and I understand why, to just sort of settle in on the things that you know, the technologies you understand, the payment rails that you're comfortable with, the products that you're focused on, and just sort of lean as far into those as possible. And there's a comfort associated with doing that, right? It's nice to know what you're talking about, and to not be sort of constantly starting over. But again, going back to the challenge I mentioned before, things are just changing so fast, and the payment space, again, whether we like it or not, is always on the cutting edge of those changes, right? There's other parts of banking and insurance and other things that sort of follow and are sort of laggards behind. Payments is always cutting edge. It's always first. It's always the thing that goes first. And so if you work in payments, you have to be comfortable with not knowing exactly what's going on, or constantly sort of challenging your old worldview. And so I think the silver bullet that I have found myself is to just constantly be trying to ask yourself the question, um, what do I think I know that might be wrong? And I think that's such an important question to just constantly ask yourself and constantly challenge yourself with, because what you will find is, whether it's banks looking into what fintech companies are doing, or fintech companies looking into what banks are doing, or people who are coming out of the ACH wire sort of Fed now world and sort of learning more about cards, or learning more about crypto, or whatever the different things are. Like, there's just so many different ways ultimately to transmit money, and those things are going to continue to evolve, and the opportunities around them will continue to change. And just being really curious and open-minded about those, and willing to just say, you know what, we got really good at this thing, it made sense at the time, but the world has changed and we have to change with it. And being adaptable to that, I think, is just so incredibly important.
I think that's excellent advice. Thank you so much for that. So before I let you go, though, I want to make sure that our audience knows how to, listen to Fintech Takes podcasts, or to receive your newsletter. So where can they go for more information?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for asking. So the podcast is just called Fintech Takes. And so Spotify, Apple, Google, whatever your podcast platform of choice is, you can just search for Fintech Takes and it should pop up. We do a podcast every week with recurring co-hosts along with special guests. So cover a lot of different ground in the podcast. And then the newsletter, just Google Fintech Takes and it'll pop up. Would love to have you subscribe. We do a sort of news summary newsletter every Monday, and then sort of a deeper dive essay onto interesting fintech or payments topics every Friday. And again, as I said before, it's a constant journey of learning and discovering things that I didn't know or that I had wrong, and would love to have you join me for that journey.
Wonderful. Well, I've enjoyed this conversation much. I have learned a lot myself. So thank you so much for your insights and your valuable suggestions for our audience. I just want to thank you for your time today, Alex. And I also want to thank everybody for watching. Have a great day.
Thank you.